Hello, everyone. This is Yitzchak Ruderman, Isaac Ruderman, recording in Brooklyn, New York, USA. And what I would like to talk about today is the history of a educational program that I was part of in South Africa during the 1970s and onwards. And it no longer exists, but during its time, it was a groundbreaking and pioneering effort of Jewish education on a tertiary level, meaning on a university education level. The story goes back to a person by the name of Rabbi Moshe Kurtstag. He was eventually the head of the South African Beth Din in Johannesburg. And he was a rabbinical lecturer that was brought to South Africa to teach a group of young rabbis to become rabbis. And he saw the potential among the youth of Johannesburg and South Africa of an interest in Jewish studies, in Torah learning. And he tried to broaden the concept to go beyond just teaching a group of rabbinical students. He wanted to broaden it up and open up Jewish education to university students. One of the things he tried, he came to South Africa in the early 1960s. One of the things he tried was going to the University of the Witwatersrand and giving shiurim, which means lectures in Judaism. He found that the students were interested, but one of the problems was, and this was a major problem, was continuity. Students would drop in and out, and it was difficult to complete any course of lectures with any satisfactory conclusion. So what he decided to do was to pioneer a program. Now, in South Africa, there is an institution called the University of South Africa, abbreviated as UNISA. It's a correspondence university. In those days, it was difficult for a lot of people to attend classes. So the University of South Africa would print up all the lectures. Students would have to qualify with the same qualifications of entering any university, but they could remain at work. They could remain in far-flung communities. This was before the internet, and lectures would be printed up in full, so students would not have to write down the lectures. And the study guides were sent to the students. Students would have to submit written essays and projects, and there would also be seminars during the course of the year where students could meet their lecturers. In addition, students could call their lecturers on the phone at any time and speak with them and get guidance. It was very difficult, as you can imagine, to study in this kind of program on your own. And they didn't have a high pass rate because of the academic difficulties of meeting this high university threshold through correspondence. But Rabbi Kurtstag decided if he turned it into a full-time program by providing lecturers and support and tutorials, he could get Jewish students to, instead of going to the University of the Witwatersrand, to join this program and at the same time participate in a program of Jewish studies for part of the day. And the program would last 5 days a week, Friday being a short day, Monday through Thursday being full days, meaning, from about 8 a.m. to about 6 p.m. And students would be required to attend Jewish studies lectures half the day and do the university studies the other half of the day. There would be rabbis and lecturers for the Jewish studies, and there would be tutors and people with qualified degrees and with experience in dealing with UNISA, educating the students in how to fulfill their written assignments and to pass exams. And this was the brainchild of Rabbi Kurtstag. Now, it was difficult for him to sell it because the powers that be in Johannesburg were very pro-University of Witwatersrand. And they didn't like the idea of creating a Jewish university program. But he persevered, and eventually he was able to recruit 6 students to start in 1973. I was one of those first students. I met Rabbi Kurtstag when I was doing my national service in Heidelberg. National service means army training. In Heidelberg, he was the champion, and I was accepted to do a BA at WITS, at University of Witwatersrand. Rabbi Kurtstag came along and described to me a new program he was planning, and would I be interested, because I did have an interest in Jewish studies as well at that time. And after much thought and going through a whole series of back and forth debates with myself and discussing it with other people, I decided to dive in the deep end, and I became one of there were 4 of us doing the full-time program, meaning Jewish studies half a day and university studies the other half of a day. I was going to do a BA because I wanted to go into teaching eventually, a BA in history and English, and then half a day of Jewish studies. And there were 2 students who joined us only for Jewish studies. And this is the way it was for the first 2 years, 1973 and 1974. For the second year, there were no new students. Our lecturers in Jewish studies were mainly a man by the name of Rabbi Moshe Barron, who now lives in England. He was a rabbi in a small community, and he was an alumnus and disciple of Rabbi Kurtstag, and he was our main Gemara teacher. We were introduced to Gemara for the first time, and Talmud and Jewish texts, which we had never studied in our Jewish day schools that we had attended. I had attended the King David School. There was Moshe Cohen, who had attended the King David School. There was Hilton Edelstein from Benoni, who had attended the Jewish day school in Benoni. And there was Melvin Bloch, who did not go to a Jewish day school, but he joined us for the full-time program. And then the 2 students for Jewish studies were Dave Drutman, who was doing a law degree at Wits University, and Les Israel Winnett, who was doing a degree in librarianship through UNISA. So the 6 of us were students. It was a cozy atmosphere. My personal English and history tutor was Mr. Alan Wetcliffe. He now lives in Israel with his family. And so it progressed. By the 3rd year, Rabbi Sandler, Eliezer Sandler, Lawrence Sandler, who was also one of the Jewish studies lecturers and was very close with Rabbi Kurtstag in founding the program, became the army chaplain of the South African Defense Forces, and he managed to recruit some additional students. So the group grew. There were about 10 or so new students for the 3rd year. 2 of the students, one of them was Rabbi Mark Menachem Raff, and then his brother Eric Chaim Raff joined. Rabbi Raff today heads the Maharsha community and has become quite a leading rabbi in Johannesburg. And by the end of the 3rd year, I was the first graduate of JSUP because I managed to get my degree, my BA, within the 3-year time frame. And then for the 4th year, I went on to do my HDIP Ed postgrad, higher diploma in education postgraduate through UNISA. And again, with the help of Mr. Wetcliffe, because he was a teacher and lecturer himself. By the 5th year, actually, no, I think it was already the fourth year they opened it up to girls. So girls were able to join, and we got a whole new cohort of students. It became co-educational, male and female students. About another 20 students joined. And then for the fifth year, they moved premises and moved to the Arcadia orphanage, where they had the use of the grounds because there were less Jewish orphans at the Arcadia orphanage, and they could use buildings on the grounds of the Arcadia orphanage in Johannesburg for the JSUP program. And the program lasted about 20 years. There were a lot of graduates that came out of the program. Eventually, Rabbi Kurtstag had many more duties at the Beth Din, so it was difficult for him to continue managing the program on its own. It reached a height of about 120 students at its peak, and he was looking for a way to make it grow. So he joined in a partnership with the South African Board of Jewish Education. They partly sponsored the program in coordination with the Hebrew Teachers College at Arcadia, but that wasn't enough. They were still looking for more sponsorship. It was very difficult. The community still had difficulty in accepting that there could be a university program outside of Wits University in Johannesburg, and of course in Cape Town. You had University of Cape Town, and that's where most Jews went for their higher education if they remained in South Africa. But eventually, Rabbi Kurtstag partnered with Or Sameach Yeshiva, but they were unable to keep the program going, and it became defunct. Now, here's something very interesting. The program, in a certain sense, fathered two other programs. There was a group of entrepreneurs that started Midrand College. A Mr. Zulberg and a Mr. Gabi Lurie started Midrand College, and they took the concept from Rabbi Kurtstag. They saw how UNISA studies with their printed lectures could be turned into a full-time program. So they took that concept and monetized it, making it into a commercially viable venture, and that continued to this day. It has a different name now because they were bought out by a different company eventually. And another program was founded by an alumnus of JSUP, Ari Katz, founded Boston College in Johannesburg, which still functions, and he took the idea straight from JSUP because he was a student at JSUP, and again made a parallel program of Jewish studies, actually first university studies, and providing voluntary Jewish studies. It was not effective as JSUP, and eventually the Jewish studies part just petered out, and it's become an established institution in Johannesburg, Boston College, where people can go for degrees, and I believe they still do it with the help of UNISA. But these were two commercially monetized ventures in higher education that sprung forth from Rabbi Kurtstag's idea of founding JSUP. Essentially, you could say the South African Jewish community was not big enough or viable enough to support such a concept, especially at a time when the Jewish community was shrinking. In the last 50 years, the South African Jewish community has gone from about 120,000 Jews to 60,000 Jews. And those who want to pursue Jewish studies have been able to mesh that with going to Wits or UNISA or going to Israel with shiurim that are available in Johannesburg. But at its time, it was actually a brilliant idea. It was like a Jewish university. In America, of course, it's similar in some ways, to Yeshiva University. But the difference between JSUP and Yeshiva University was that Yeshiva University has an ideology and a belief in blending secular and Jewish studies, a kind of synthesis of Torah im derech eretz, they call it, combining Torah umada, Judaism and secular knowledge into one cohesive whole. They have a certain approach to that, whereas JSUP did not subscribe to that ideology. JSUP was basically, you study for a degree to qualify for a profession and to enable you to earn a living. And at the same time, on a different track, you're doing Jewish studies, introduction to Talmud, introduction to Chumash, introduction to Jewish philosophy, study of Jewish texts. Students were asked to deliver lectures of their own, on the Parshat HaShavua, weekly Torah portion. When holidays came up, there were certain celebrations that students were invited to. Students were invited for Shabbat. Students were invited for Tikkun Leil Shavuot, the study of Torah on the night of Shavuos. So it was completely two separate tracks, the secular studies track and the Jewish studies track. And hopefully, with this video, I can pay honor to Rabbi Kurtstag and the many teachers and rabbis who taught there over the years. There are students in South Africa, alumni and alumna in South Africa and all over the world who studied at JSUP. JSUP students received a diploma in Jewish studies if they attended lectures and were serious students. There were, in some cases, I know in my case, there were projects we were required to submit, like term papers and projects on various topics. And a lot of the alumni have led very successful lives and have their Jewish lives were enriched by the Torah knowledge and Jewish experiences, the Shabbatons and the many Jewish experiences and Jewish guest speakers and rabbis and rebbitzins that came to speak at JSUP. And we are really grateful and have hakarat hatov thanks to JSUP and Rabbi Kurtstag and the program for everything that it did. In my own case, I was inspired to continue with Jewish studies and go on and study in the United States. And even though I didn't intend to, I did eventually qualify as a rabbi, and I went into the field of Jewish outreach. I also continued with my higher secular education and continued. I got a master's in education, an MA in education at Teachers College, Columbia University, where I also did my MA thesis on the Second World War and Jewish education in America. And in many ways, it's a pity the program didn't last, but we have to be grateful for the time that it was there and was able to service the community. A truly visionary program. There was one more interesting thing that I wanted to mention, that in America, besides Yeshiva University, there were a number of yeshiva deans, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner and Rabbi Shraga Feivel Mendelowitz, that wanted to found a Jewish university where their students, the students of Yeshiva Rabbi Chaim Belen and the students at Yeshiva Torah Vodaas would be able to attend secular classes and get a degree instead of going to Brooklyn College or the various universities in New York to avoid the same problem of assimilation and being influenced by ideologies that are not compatible with Yiddishkeit. But it didn't take off. It didn't take off and become anything. But the idea was this. So you see that Rabbi Kurtstag was thinking along the lines of those rabbis who, realizing the importance and the challenge of secular degrees and becoming professionals in a modern world, living in a modern world, yet at the same time providing and obtaining a Torah education so that people would be prepared to live their lives not just as professionals, but as fully educated and proud Jews. Thank you so much for listening.